My stepkids told their friends I was just a temporary lodger. When I heard that, I canceled their school tuition, took back the car keys, and stopped paying for groceries. Their mother was the first to call me in panic. Make sure to subscribe, write your story in the comments, and let's begin. My name is Michael. I am 44 years old, and I have spent most of my adult life with grease under my nails and the smell of metal and oil in my lungs. I work as a mechanic, the kind of man who builds, repairs, and holds things together long after they should have fallen apart. For years I thought that instinct, to fix, to restore, to keep alive what others abandoned, was a gift. But in family life, that instinct became a curse. I used to believe that if you poured enough love into something broken, it would eventually stop being broken. If you gave time, patience, and your hard-earned money, the cracks would heal. I told myself that devotion could buy belonging, that sacrifice could earn love. It sounds naive when I say it now, but back then, I clung to that belief like a lifeline. 7 years ago, I met Laura. She was 2 years younger than me, 32, with dark hair always falling across her face and a smile that looked tired even when it tried to be bright. She was raising 3 children on her own. Emma, 12, Josh, 10, and Lucas, 7. Their father, Chris, had been absent in every way that mattered. No steady child support, no visits except when it suited him, no late-night calls to check in. He had disappeared into the haze of his own selfishness, leaving Laura to patch together a life for the 4 of them. When I first stepped into their old house, I saw how fragile that life was. The roof leaked when it rained, paint peeled from the walls, and the furniture looked like it had been scavenged from second-hand shops. The children had grown used to living with scarcity. Emma had learned to stretch out her shoes past their breaking point. Josh had taught himself to stay quiet when dinner was thinner than usual. Lucas, the youngest, carried an empty look in his eyes that no 7-year-old should know. They didn't complain. They had learned early that complaints didn't bring change. At the time, I was renting a modest 1-bedroom apartment in Ohio, putting every extra hour of overtime into savings. My dream was simple: one day to own a house. Not a mansion, not anything grand. Just a place with my name on the deed, something solid, something no one could take away. But when I met Laura, my dream shifted. I no longer wanted a house for myself. I wanted a home for all of us. After a few months of dating, when most men would still be testing the waters, I made a decision that changed the course of my life. I bought a house in the suburbs of Chicago. The down payment came from my savings, years of sweat compressed into a single signature. The mortgage was mine. Laura was supposed to handle daily expenses, groceries, utilities, small bills, but the foundation rested squarely on my shoulders. I carried it without hesitation, because I believed I was building something permanent. I still remember the day we unlocked the door for the first time. The children ran through the halls like it was Christmas morning. Emma chose the bedroom with the largest window. Josh claimed the one with the closet he could turn into his secret base. Lucas spun in circles in the empty living room until he collapsed onto the carpet, laughing. I stood there watching them, thinking, this is it. This is what a family looks like. I poured myself into that house as though it were a 4th child. For Josh, I built a gaming corner, second-hand console, a decent TV, shelves for his collection of games. For Emma, I created a quiet nook with a desk, good lighting, and a stack of supplies so she could study without distraction. For Lucas, I lined bookshelves with stories and picture books, teaching him how to lose himself in worlds where fathers never vanished. Every corner of that house bore the mark of my effort. I drove them to school every morning before heading to the shop. I helped with homework at night, even when the numbers on Emma's math sheets blurred after 12-hour shifts. I patched the tires on their bikes, cheered at their soccer games, paid for their after-school activities. When birthdays came, I made sure there were cakes big enough to share with friends, gifts they could be proud of, and memories they wouldn't associate with absence. I was there in ways Chris had never been. Laura noticed. She told me often that she didn't know how she would manage without me. She would reach across the couch, squeeze my hand, and whisper, "You saved us, Michael." Those words kept me moving, even when exhaustion hollowed me out. First, it felt like everything was working. Emma would lean against me while we watched movies. Josh used to thank me shyly when I fixed something of his. Lucas, too young to remember much of Chris, would sometimes call me Dad without thinking, and each time it lit a fire in my chest. I thought those moments were proof. Proof that love and patience could fill the gaps that biology left behind. But what I didn't know then, and what I learned the hardest way possible, was that early smiles can be deceptive. That gratitude, when it isn't rooted in respect, fades like mist. That a man can give everything he has, and still be nothing more than a placeholder in someone else's story. Back then, though, I was blind to the future. I told myself I had finally found my place. I had worked, I had sacrificed, I had built, and surely that meant I belonged. Surely that meant I was one of them. I see now that I mistook dependency for acceptance. And one day that mistake would cost me everything. The first cracks appeared quietly, almost invisibly, like hairline fractures in a piece of glass. At first, I told myself they were nothing, the ordinary moods of children growing older. But looking back, I see those were not small things. They were warnings, and I ignored them. Started with Josh. He was 12 by then, tall for his age, his voice just beginning to deepen. One afternoon, after I had driven him home from practice, I handed him a new pair of cleats I had bought on the way. He didn't look at me. He didn't even take the box from my hands. He muttered a flat thanks and walked inside. No spark, no gratitude, just expectation. It was a small thing, but it left a weight in my chest. Then Emma, who had once asked me to help her study late into the night, began to pull away. She rolled her eyes when I offered suggestions, sighed dramatically if I asked how her day went, snapped when I reminded her to put her phone down during meals. At first, I blamed it on adolescence. Everyone said teenage girls had moods, that it was part of growing. But each time she dismissed me, I felt something inside me dim. Lucas, the youngest, cut deepest without meaning to. One day, out of nowhere, he stopped calling me Dad. He went back to Michael. The name fell flat on my ears, colder than it had any right to be. I laughed the first time he did it, pretending it was funny, but when it continued, the laughter turned into silence. He was only 9 years old, and already learning that bloodlines mattered more than presence. Laura noticed, of course. I spoke to her about it. She would brush my concerns away with a smile and a shake of her head. It's normal, Michael. They're teenagers. They're testing boundaries. They'll come around. She believed, or wanted me to believe, that the coldness meant nothing. That it was just the season of life we had to endure. But she didn't see what I saw. That the coldness was not temporary. It was growing, root and branch, and it was aimed only at me. Still, I held on to hope. I thought, when we marry, things will change. Marriage would make me official, I told myself. Marriage would prove my permanence. The children would finally understand I wasn't going anywhere, that I was family in name as well as action. We planned a small wedding. Nothing grand, just a gathering of relatives and friends in a rented hall, with music and food, and the promise of new beginnings. I remember standing at the altar, sweating through my suit, my eyes locked on Laura. She looked beautiful, radiant, her smile wide enough to make me believe in second chances. But then, in the middle of it all, I heard Emma's voice. She was whispering to her friend, thinking no one else could hear. Well, Mom married Michael. He pays for everything, so it makes sense. That sentence should have shattered me then and there. But I buried it. I pretended I hadn't heard. I told myself she was just being sarcastic, just a teenager making light of something she didn't understand. But deep down, I knew. She didn't see me as a stepfather. She didn't even see me as family. To her, I was a paycheck, a walking wallet wearing a suit. Not a word about me as a man. Not a word about love. I tried to shake it off. I cut the cake, danced with Laura, smiled in photographs. But the words echoed in my head long after the music stopped. He pays for everything, so it makes sense. That was my identity in her world. Not father, not protector, not even Michael the man. Just the payer. It didn't stop there. A few weeks later, we were sitting around the dinner table, the 5 of us. I had grilled steaks outside, set the table, poured the drinks. I wanted it to feel like family. But halfway through the meal, Josh put his fork down, looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're not our father. Stop acting like you're in charge." The words hit like a blade. He said it with no anger, no yelling, just flat certainty, as if stating a fact that needed no debate. I looked at Laura, waiting for her to correct him, to remind him of respect, to tell him that words like that were unacceptable. But she said nothing. She kept eating. The silence was louder than his insult. I swallowed hard, forced myself to chew, forced myself to stay calm. But inside, something cracked. That silence, her silence, was worse than his defiance. It was permission. It was agreement. From then on, dinners became battlefields of silence. If I asked Josh to clear his plate, he would ignore me until Laura repeated the request. Emma wouldn't look at me at all, speaking only to her mother or her brothers. Lucas laughed when they mocked me, too young to know he was cutting deeper than anyone else. I kept giving. I kept showing up. But each time they dismissed me, each time Laura refused to defend me, I felt myself disappearing in my own house. I had walked into that home believing love could fix anything. By the time we were married, I was beginning to see the truth. Love given freely means nothing if it isn't returned with respect. And in that house, respect was the one thing I would never receive. It happened on an ordinary afternoon, the kind of day when the air feels heavy but nothing seems urgent. I was walking past the hallway, tools still in my hand from fixing the cabinet door, when I heard laughter drifting down from upstairs. Emma's voice, sharp and mocking. Josh's, lower now, edged with that teenage arrogance. Lucas giggling in the background, desperate to belong. I might have walked away. I might have given them privacy. But something in their tone stopped me. Something cruel. So I stood there, silent in the shadows, listening to the children I had clothed, fed, and carried for years. "He's just a tenant," Josh said, his words dripping with disdain. "A temporary lodger. Our house is our family, and he just pays the bills." The laughter that followed was like glass shattering in my chest. They weren't whispering it in anger. They weren't even arguing with me. They were laughing, joking, bonding over their rejection of me. Emma chimed in, her voice laced with venom. "Exactly. He thinks he's part of us, but he's not. He's just here, like furniture. He doesn't matter." Lucas laughed louder than both of them, the innocent cruelty of a child echoing the poison of his siblings. He didn't even know what the words meant, not fully, but he knew enough to join in. And in that moment, something inside me broke. I had spent years convincing myself I was building a family. I had given them rooms, books, games, clothes, food, safety. I had carried them in ways their real father never did. And yet, in their eyes, I was nothing more than a wallet with a pulse. A lodger in the house I had bought. A ghost in their lives. I didn't confront them that day. I didn't storm upstairs or demand apologies. Instead, I walked into my office, shut the door, and pulled open the drawer where I kept the files no one ever asked about. Receipts, statements, proof. I spread them across the desk, years of transactions, thousands of entries, a paper trail of devotion, school tuition, medical bills, sports equipment, vacations, groceries, insurance, utilities, car repairs, birthdays and Christmases. It was all there, line after line, number after number, spelling out the truth they refused to see. By the time I finished, my hands were trembling. I added the figures, calculated the totals, and the number stared back at me like a verdict. Nearly $500,000. $500,000 poured into a family that laughed at me behind closed doors. I sat in the dim light of that office and let the truth settle like ash in my lungs. I had not been a father, not even a stepfather. I had been a provider, nothing more. A tenant in the very home I built. That night, I lay beside Laura, listening to her breathe, wondering if she knew. Wondering if her silence all these years had been ignorance or complicity. She had watched the children mock me. She had stayed quiet when Josh declared I wasn't his father. She had laughed at their jokes, excused their cruelty, told me to wait it out. Maybe she believed it was harmless. But to me it was betrayal. Not just from the children, but from her. The next morning, my resolve hardened. If I was only a lodger, then I would live like one. Lodgers don't pay for everything. Lodgers don't carry the weight of a family on their back. Lodgers pay rent, maybe, but never more than their share. So I began cutting the strings. One by one, quietly, methodically. First, I stopped paying for their school. Tuition notices would arrive, and I would let them sit unopened on the counter. I took back the car keys, locking them in my toolbox in the garage. The grocery money, I cut it off. If Laura wanted food in the fridge, she would have to provide it. The internet bill, the insurance payments, the activities, all gone, stripped away in silence. At first, no one noticed. The Wi-Fi still worked, the fridge was still full, the car still had gas. But when the weeks turned into months, the cracks began to show. The internet shut off one afternoon, and Emma screamed at the router like it had betrayed her. Josh stormed into the kitchen when his sports program canceled his registration. Lucas cried when he couldn't watch his shows. And Laura, she was the first to panic. Her voice sharp, her eyes wide, as she demanded to know what was happening. Michael, the bills, did you forget? The insurance is overdue. The kids' programs are canceled. What's going on? I looked at her, calm, steady, the weight of $500,000 resting in my silence. Nothing's going on, I said. I just stopped paying. The shock on her face was almost satisfying. She blinked, waiting for me to explain, to backpedal, to soften. But I didn't, because for the first time I understood the truth. They had called me a lodger. And now they would learn what life looked like without the man they dismissed. The house grew tense. The children complained, begged, shouted. Laura tried to reason with me, tried to guilt me, tried to remind me of promises. But I had already given too much. I watched them flounder as the safety net disappeared. And in their panic, I saw something new in their eyes. Not respect, not love, but recognition. Recognition of the power they had always pretended I didn't hold. Recognition that the lodger was, in fact, the foundation. They had mistaken my patience for weakness. They had mistaken my silence for submission. But now they would understand. Without me, there was nothing. That realization was my turning point. That was the moment the scales fell from my eyes, and I understood what I truly was to them. Not a father, not family, just a man they used until they believed they didn't need me. But I was done being used. I sold the house 6 months after I stopped paying. By then the silence in those rooms had become unbearable. Every corner filled with echoes of contempt and the memory of laughter at my expense. Selling it wasn't just financial, it was symbolic. I would no longer carry a home where I had been reduced to a ghost. I called a realtor, signed the papers, and watched the for sale sign sink into the lawn I had once mowed with pride. Laura cried when I told her. Not because she loved the house, but because she feared the collapse that would follow. Without me, she had no cushion, no backup, no safety net. Chris had already vanished into the fog of his own failures, disappearing the moment responsibility knocked. For years she had leaned on me. Now, with the ground pulled away, she staggered. When the moving trucks arrived, I stood in the driveway and watched as the children loaded boxes. None of them looked at me. Not Emma, who once leaned on my shoulder during movies. Not Josh, who once ran to me when his bike chain snapped. Not Lucas, who once whispered "Dad" before sleep. Their silence was a wall, and behind that wall I was a stranger. They went to live with Laura's sister. Cramped apartment, too many people, too little space. I heard about it later from neighbors, from whispers. The kids lost their programs, their extras, their comforts. The things they had laughed about me paying for became things they suddenly missed. I moved to a nearby city, found a modest apartment, nothing grand, nothing decorated for anyone but myself. For the first time in years, I woke up without someone else's demands pressing against my chest. For the first time, I could breathe. A few months passed before the letters started arriving. At first from Laura. Pleas for help, reminders of the years we had shared, suggestions that we could still salvage something. Then from the children, scribbled notes that weren't apologies so much as negotiations. We didn't mean it like that. We were just joking. Please, help us with school again. But every word reeked of self-interest. They weren't sorry for disrespecting me. They were sorry for losing the comfort my labor had provided. They regretted the collapse of privilege, not the wounds they had inflicted. I did not answer. Instead, I built something new. I began dating a woman with no children, a woman who saw me not as a provider but as a man. She respected me in ways I had never known in that house. Simple, quiet respect that cost nothing but meant everything. When I spoke, she listened. When I gave, she thanked me. It was enough to remind me what love was supposed to feel like. Sometimes, when I shop for groceries, I see Laura. The years have weighed heavy on her face. Her eyes are tired, her shoulders bent, her cart half empty. She doesn't always speak. Sometimes she just looks at me, as though she's staring at the life she let crumble. Other times she whispers a greeting, her voice low, almost ashamed. And in those moments, I remember the day I heard them upstairs. The laughter, the words, "He's just a tenant, a lodger." That was the day I died to them. That was the day I buried the illusion of family I had worked so hard to build. Do I regret it? Sometimes. I regret the years I spent believing sacrifice could buy love. I regret the sleepless nights, the double shifts, the money poured into a void. I regret mistaking dependency for affection, silence for acceptance. But I do not regret walking away, because walking away was the first time I chose myself. I tell this story not to seek pity, but to lay bare the truth that others might be too afraid to admit. Not every family can be mended. Not every child learns respect. Not every spouse protects you when you need it most. Sometimes love is just a mask for exploitation, and the only way to survive is to tear it off and face the emptiness underneath. That is what I did. And though the emptiness still haunts me, it is mine. Mine and no one else's to control. So now I leave you with the question that still echoes in my head, in the quiet hours of the night when memory claws at me. Was I wrong? Was I cruel to cut them off, to sell the house, to leave them to the reality they had mocked me for? Or was I finally right, to reclaim my dignity, to demand respect, to end the years of thankless servitude? What would you have done if you were in my place?